For those of you who haven't heard about the series before, the premise is, in fact, the blurb really for the series, which is called Cambridge Gothic, is Cambridge is home to the brightest minds and the deadliest monsters. And the headline really is really about the fact that this is a fantasy story set in Cambridge University. And it was my debut novel, which I launched a couple of years ago, and it became an Amazon bestseller, which was great. And so I decided to continue writing that series. And in fact, Karina here, she said, just get it published, Mark. Just publish it, see what happens, and then you can decide if you want to do another one. So fortunately, it did go well. So I've just finished the second one in the series. And I've titled today's talk, Chasing Shadows, because it is a bit like that when you're writing a novel. You're never quite sure what you're doing. And as a relatively new novelist, I've been sort of like trying to sort of find a formula that works, and this one seems to do so. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to spend about 20 minutes just talking to you about the series and explain why I wrote it, also what the story's about, and finally why it may be of interest to people from NVS. And I've got time at the end to answer any questions you might have about the series or about being a writer or whatever. So first of all, a bit of background. As I said earlier, I met Karina here in Cambridge. We were both students here, and I was reading law, and but I spent most of my time, if I'm honest, in Heffer's Children's Bookshop reading fantasy books. So which I found a lot more engaging than, quite frankly, some of the books on tort and constitutional law. And I went away, and as Jane said, I had a career in business, and then I was very fortunate. I was offered the opportunity to come back as a fellow of St John's College, my old college, which I did in 2014. So I came back here, and I spent a few years working at John's, and I had this idea in my head for a book. And they always say, if you're going to write a book, make sure you write about something you know. And having spent time here as a student and also coming back as a fellow, I was starting to get to know the ins and outs of Cambridge University really well, and in particular, college life. And I know from speaking to all my friends just how much mystique there is around Cambridge University, not only as an academic institution, but also the architecture and so forth, and these strange things called fellows and these strange things like Cambridge colleges. So my idea really was to actually write a book set in Cambridge University, which would allow me to sort of peel back the layers of how the university works. Because when people think of Cambridge, they tend to think of it in terms of, yes, this world-renowned academic institution, the incredible buildings, like the Bridge of Sighs or King's College Chapel, and of course these very arcane traditions where you see people like trooping through their King's Parade wearing these strange gowns and so forth, and some of the other stuff that you hear goes on at Cambridge. And whilst that's quite a traditional view of Cambridge University, of course, my experience was very much, in the thick of it. And it was really all about people. My lasting memories of Cambridge and the things that really sort of transformed my life maybe were the people I met here. And so my experience was that, people come to Cambridge from all walks of life, and the NVS is a good example. Most of you have come from different countries, different backgrounds, different experiences, and that's certainly what I felt with the people I met here. And when people come to Cambridge, they do extraordinary things, and whether it be research or the degrees they do or whatever, and they do it in these incredible surroundings we live in. And people from all sorts of backgrounds doing extraordinary things in incredible surroundings is a bit like a fantasy novel. And so my idea was actually to write a fantasy novel based here, but actually set in the real university with all these weird things that go on in the university itself, which is not fiction, it's all fact, but actually have this supernatural fantasy storyline running in parallel. So the reader is never quite sure what's real and what's fantasy. And the idea is that you've almost got these two parallel worlds going on in this setting. And that was this idea I had for the story. And so I went ahead and I wrote it. And actually, just to explain the storyline involves two freshers. who come to Cambridge University and they find something dark and mysterious is prowling the courts. And the thing about what happens when they get here, of course, is that they arrive and they experience life as a student, but they also experience this extraordinary thing that is going on. And the two students concerned, I've tried to make sure that the characters I've got in the story represent the sort of experience you would get when you're actually here at Cambridge. So, for example, the two main characters, is a boy called Nick, who's from a working class background in the Midlands, from Nottingham, and he actually is from a mining village just outside Nottingham. I know it quite well because our boys used to play rugby there. So he's from a comprehensive school, and he's the first in his family to get to university. And he actually gets into Cambridge on a full bursary from St John's College, which is actually what you can get, a full bursary from St John's College to study here. And that's one of the areas of the country which St John's recruits from, the Midlands and the Northwest. So all very accurate, and that's his sort of background. Then we've got Annabelle, who's from a grammar school. And for those of you who aren't from the UK, the grammar schools are basically, there used to be a system where we had two levels of secondary school. We had the grammar schools, which were for the more academically gifted children, and then we had secondary modern, which was for people like normal people. And so what we would find is that a lot of grammar schools develop quite strong relationships with Cambridge colleges, because they would often have good students coming through the grammar schools and go to Cambridge colleges. And certainly that was the case at John's. You know, most of my friends when I was a student back here in 1981 were from grammar schools. And so Annabelle, who's the other fresher, she comes from a grammar school in the south of England that's got a relationship with Cambridge, and she gets into John's. And then the third student involved in the story is a privately educated student who's a third year. He's not a fresher, he's a slightly older student. He's Giles. He's from a dysfunctional family, and he was sent away to boarding school. And so he actually ended up at Cambridge, and he is very gifted. He's a scholar. So we have two freshers and a scholar, and the sort of the key sort of mysterious character in the story is a professor, an ancient professor called Professor Ravi Gupta, who actually came to Cambridge again on a scholarship many years earlier in the 1960s, and he's from India. So that's where his background is. So those are my sort of four main characters. And the mystery, although I wrote the first book not knowing if it was going to be successful, actually I wrote the first book almost as book one in a trilogy. And the mystery actually takes place over the three books. And the first book is set in that first term when the freshers arrive. So Nick and Annabelle arrive at St John's College. And the first book actually takes place in Freshers Week. It's a 1 week, basically, storyline in Freshers Week. And then the second book takes place in the Lent term. And the Lent term is obviously the one just after Christmas. And the third book is set in the summer term. So you actually experience the full calendar year at a college. And the plot is very fast-paced. I write sort of fast-paced novels, so it's a fast-paced plot with lots of twists and turns. I tend to leave cliffhangers at the end of each of the books. So there's a cliffhanger at the end of book one, there's a cliffhanger at the end of book two, and obviously there's a completion of the story in book three, which is what I'm currently writing. So I wrote the story with teenagers in mind. And then when I launched it, what I discovered was actually it has a much broader audience. In fact, the majority of my readers are actually over the age of 30. In fact, I've got a very, very strong following in North America, and they tend to be older still in North America. So I've got really a very broad range. So although it's targeted at teenagers as a storyline, actually it's got very broad appeal. And I think one of the reasons that it's actually worked as a story is, and I think the reason why it might be of interest to people from the NBS is because the depiction of Cambridge is absolutely authentic. So it really draws on my personal insights as a student here and as a fellow. But also, I also recruited a group of advanced readers from across the university. And these are people who enjoy these sorts of books, but they are fellows. I've got students. I've also got staff from the various colleges as well, who are my advanced reading group. And what I do is when I write the manuscripts, I send them to that advanced reading group, and they will actually critique my depiction of what's going on in the college and university to make sure it's authentic. And some of them have been very kind to me to actually show me around a room that I'm describing, whether it be the library at St. John's College or the boathouse down by the river, or they've actually taken me to lectures. So one of my characters, Nick, is studying law, and the law students very kindly took me to a law lecture, and I spent a morning listening to law lectures, which was quite frightening, actually, having been there 30 odd years ago, to go back and hear it all again. And I have to say it was a lot easier understanding it this time than it was when I was 18. So I think the lectures are a lot better than they used to be. That and the fact you actually have slides you can read, as opposed to someone just standing there in a gown, just talking at you. So that was really interesting, because I definitely, in depicting lectures, I would have got it wrong if I hadn't been to a modern day lecture. So that group of advanced readers has been invaluable in making sure the books are authentic. And I call them my Gothic scholars. Okay, they are my Gothic scholars, because the series Cambridge Gothic, we have a series of scholars who basically make sure I get it right. And of course, the other thing I'm able to do is to visit the various locations in which the scenes are set. It's very much a scene-based book. And so the great thing is I do go to the locations that I'm setting the scenes in, and I take lots and lots of photographs. So I make sure that, the feedback I get from people is that when they actually, those who actually live in Cambridge, who actually read the book, they can imagine exactly where it's set, and they can see exactly how it plays out in that lecture room or whatever. So that's, I think, why it's been relatively successful. And I think the other thing is that, of course, setting it in Cambridge gives me a huge amount of material to actually weave into the storyline. And Freshers Week is sort of legendary at Cambridge, but I'm able to talk, by using the plot, I'm able to describe what it's like to go to hall, or to eat in the buttery, the self-service buttery, which people might not know there is a self-service buttery at John's, but there is. Or what it's like when the students are having a fairly wild time in the college bar. Again, that is described. And obviously I cover lectures, supervisions, which obviously are when the students are, 2 people or 3 people with a professor having, basically a class in a college, and tutorials, which of course are very different to what happens in Oxford. So at Cambridge, a tutorial is a social gathering, where a professor will invite, or a fellow will invite, the students in his charge or her charge to their rooms, and they will actually have a social gathering. So a tutorial is different to a supervision, which is academic. Tutorial is social and pastoral. And the other sort of bits of detail you can get in there is the fact that the person who is your tutor is not in your subject, because they don't want someone who's making decisions about the grade you're getting to actually be hosting you for a social gathering. Your tutor is actually from a different discipline. So I can weave in bits of detail about how the university works into the storyline. And then obviously a huge part of student life does not involve their academic subjects. So I'm able to sort of explore the characters through the sort of activities they get involved in outside of the classroom. So things like college sport. Nick, plays rugby. Annabelle gives rowing a go. Drama, Giles is involved in the ADC theatre. So, the ADC, my Gothic scholar from the ADC theatre was very helpful in taking me behind the scenes in the theatre as to how that works. I'm also able to sort of look at things like, Giles gets into trouble at one point, so he's deaned. And you may not have heard of deaning, but there's 2 deans in a college. There's the dean of chapel, who will cover the religious services, but the person that most people fear is the dean of discipline. And the dean of discipline is the person who will actually, if you get into trouble, then the dean of discipline will actually issue you, will hold a hearing and will issue you with some sort of punishment. So, and those punishments can range from something very arcane to something quite pragmatic. And again, I have been deaned in my time as a student, so I was able to describe, a deaning situation, which a lot of people really love that scene, because it's a great fun scene. So, and then of course, the other thing I talk a lot about in the books, or what I'm able to draw in to the books, are the staff who work in places like colleges or departments. And a lot of people forget that the majority of people who work at Cambridge University are actually non-academic. And if you speak to students, particularly alumni who've left Cambridge, they've got as many fond memories of the staff who either, cooked for them or cleaned for them or disciplined them or helped them when they got stuck or whatever, be that a bedder, a fellow steward or a porter, and the great thing is that it's a rich source for me of characters. It's tapping into the different elements of our working college and so drawing some of those sort of characters into the plot. And some of my favorite characters that I enjoy writing about, I've got a porter I absolutely love called Bert. I love using him, and I've got a really terrific bedder called Rose, who are fantastic fun and add a huge amount of humanity and humour to the story in a very authentic way, because actually, quite frankly, that's what bedders and porters do. They add humanity and humour to what can be quite a pressurised existence as a student at Cambridge. And of course, I have the fellows, and the fellows, many people say my fellows are unbelievable. And whilst my portraits of fellows are not based on anyone who really does exist, they're not a million miles away from some of the people you meet at Cambridge. And I think it's fair to say that if they knew what fellows were really like, no one would ever believe you. So my portraits of fellows are probably slightly more realistic than the reality. So anyway, so it's great fun writing all these, and as you can see, I get very enthusiastic writing about it because I just love weaving these elements into what's essentially a fantasy story. And so yeah, it's so authentic that one of the things that's happened to me recently is that actually the Cambridge University Students' Union are involved in quite a lot of outreach activity. So I don't know whether you know, but Cambridge University basically does a huge amount trying to encourage people to think about A, going to university, and B, potentially going to Cambridge. So the outreach stuff, for example, St John's does, which is in 2 regions of the country, the sort of the northwest of the country and sort of southeast London. 2 quite deprived areas of the country. Students go out there several times a year and they run workshops out in those regions. And one of the things they try and do is they try to encourage people whose families may not have actually had anyone go to university before, or the school may not have had anyone go to Cambridge. They encourage them to sort of consider coming down for an open day. And when they're not able to come down for an open day, they often will go out to those schools and will do workshops where the students get a chance to talk what it's like being at Cambridge. And the nice thing is a lot of the students are from those regions because they've come from previous recruitment drives in those areas. And so, you've got someone from Lancashire speaking with a Lancashire accent to students, with Lancashire accents. And so it does feel like it's possible for you to actually apply to Cambridge and get in. This perception that Cambridge is only for people who went to Eton, of course, couldn't be further from the truth. So that sort of activity goes on. And one of the things that they've been struggling to do is to get students from sixth forms, let's say, in different parts of the country, to engage with what it might be like to study at Cambridge. So the Cambridge University Students' Union, a number of whom have read the books, have actually approached me, and we actually now run a workshop where I will do a couple of readings from the book to a group of people from from a school or whatever, who are shadowing students at Cambridge, to give them a story that actually allows them to understand what it's like for a student to actually study at Cambridge. And the great thing about setting a fictional story in Cambridge University is the story gets them to read about things that they probably wouldn't discover from looking at a prospectus, either because they wouldn't realize its significance in a prospectus, or secondly, they might not bother to go through all the stuff about how clubs and societies work. Whereas the great thing about a story is it gives them a reason to actually discover how the ADC theatre works. So yeah, that's been interesting. So I think that's one of the reasons why the stories have worked, because the stuff about Cambridge is so authentic and people can engage with it. So what should I sort of say for you guys? Well, I suppose the key thing to say is that if you read the book, you could walk around Cambridge and you could actually see locations that are featured in the book. And when you see that location, it won't simply be a building. You know, you'll be able to see, for example, how does a night climber climb over the wedding cake at St John's College? Because one of the scenes I have is a night climbing scene on top of New Court at St John's College, and you can actually go to where they would have climbed up the side of the building and how they would have navigated across the rooftop and where they would have made their ascent on the actual wedding cake pinnacle. So as you're walking around, that's a bit of inside knowledge you would get from reading College of Shadows, for example, that you wouldn't know even if you attended a talk at St John's College about the architecture, because no one at St John's College giving you a talk about the architecture is going to tell you how to climb onto the top of the New Court pinnacle. And equally, if you're looking at, say, if you go down for the rowing, people give you us a rough description about what it's like to row at Cambridge. But actually, you know, because Annabelle is a cox and she's a cox in a Lady Margaret Boat Club crew, you'll discover, why does Lady Margaret have red blazers? You know, why are blazers called blazers? Well, blazers are called blazers because of the Lady Margaret Boat Club of St John's College, because they were red. And when they turned up for Henley for the regattas, a lot of the American crews called them blazing jackets. And that's where the term blazer came from. So, you know, there's things that you pick up from reading the books. If you're a visitor or a scholar in Cambridge and you've only got a limited time in Cambridge and you want to sort of get in under the skin of what happens in student life, the books give you that sort of insight, not only from looking at the architecture in a different way, but also understanding some of the lore, as in L-O-R-E, the sort of the traditions and background to some of the things that goes on. And of course, you get a lot of jargon, and I'm very careful in the books to try and explain the jargon. So if I do use jargon, there will be a context for it, and you'll understand, you know, why they're called the bumps, or you'll understand, you know, like I say, what a dean is, or what a tutorial is. So actually, you know, the story actually leads you through almost in a way as to understand that concept without having to sit down and read a fairly dry explanation of it in a pamphlet. And of course, you're going to get some inside knowledge about student life that a college would never share with you. So, which is fun. And of course, it's nice for you to sort of like be able to share with your partner or whatever, who might be spending all their day in an academic department and actually doesn't spend too much time in the college, to actually understand, you know, what the students get up to when no one's looking. So that sort of stuff as well. So hopefully, as a member of the NBS, you'll find the books interesting. I mean, like I said, they're quite exciting books, and they're quite sort of fun to read. But you'll also get some great background about the place in which you live and where your partners might be working. So, yeah. So let me just show you a little bit about the books. First of all, I'm going to do a screen share if this is okay. Let's see if I can pull that up. Oh, yeah, here we go. So can you see that now on your screens? Yeah, okay, good. So this is College of Shadows, and College of Shadows is the first book in the series, Cambridge Gothic Book 1. It's got a very eye-catching cover, very familiar cover for many of you. You'll see that there. That's the Bridge of Sighs, and as I said earlier, you know, the caption really is, you know, Cambridge is the home to the brightest minds and the deadliest monsters. Well, there's a bit of a giveaway there, because there on the Bridge of Sighs, you've got your first monster, and you've got your 3 students there. So it sort of gives an impression about the nature of the story you're going to read. And obviously, you know, the crumbling structure underneath the Bridge of Sighs is because the storyline really does sort of rock the college to its foundations. You know, the dark mystery is one that, you know, really threatens the college. So that's my sort of cover for College of Shadows. And here's a couple of reviews I've had on Amazon from people who actually were at Cambridge, I discovered later. As you can see, it puts a new perspective on Cambridge landmarks. The thought of walking around real Cambridge with the possibility that the surreal lurks around a dark corner or in the grey dust is gripping. and a mix of well-observed characterization of students and their lives moves the story along at a great pace, pulling the reader along towards a great culmination. So really lovely reviews there from a couple of people at the university. In fact, I had one the other day from someone, a student, former student who was reading it, and he said actually he did have a moment walking down Portugal Place, which is a scene very early on in the story where something dark and sinister happened, where he found himself looking over his shoulder to make sure no one was following him. So hopefully it won't scare people too much, but it definitely is a bit of a thriller. And then the next thing I wanted to show you really was book 2, because if that was book 1, then book 2 is slightly different. Book 2 is, this is book 2. Book 2 is Gate of Shadows. And let's see if I can get that up for you. Let's see if I can get that. 1 second. Gate of Shadows is set in the term after Christmas. And the great thing about Gate of Shadows for me is that it actually, it allowed me to describe a term that isn't really known very well, because what happens in the Lent term is really the heart of the academic year for students. And the thing about Lent term is that when you know a lot about Freshers' Week, and it's all very exciting and so forth, Freshers' Week, and you know about the May balls and the summer term and everything happens there. But actually the great thing about the Lent term is actually when most of the work gets done. And a lot of students really struggle in the Lent term because everybody knows the summer term is coming. And in the summer term, obviously you've got your exams. So a lot of the activities get brought forward into the Lent term. And you have this almost like crisis for students in the Lent term, where actually you find in the Lent term that the students are under pressure academically, but also trying to complete their play performance or trying to complete their sport engagement and so forth. And so Lent term is a really interesting term from a student point of view. And as a consequence, I think the situation for the characters in this story, it's a real pressure story. And so I really like this book because it actually gives me a chance to describe one of the most exciting times of the year, and one that actually I think the students really struggle with. So Gate of Shadows is the second book in the series, and the actual cover really reflects that. It's got this, hopefully you can see that now. So the cover is set in front of the Eagle Gate, and the Eagle Gate is right in front of the wedding cake at St John's College. So if you go into St John's College on the backs and you look at New Court Building, you'll see the wedding cake. But actually in front of that is this stunning gate called the Eagle Gate. And a lot of the key action in this book actually takes place in the cellars beneath New Court. Again, not somewhere you will go to normally, but it does give you quite a lot of action in there. And actually I contacted the maintenance department at John's to give me a layout of the cellars at John's. So when you are, when the characters are running through the cellars underneath John's, actually that is pretty much, I can draw you a map of where they run to in the cellars. And as you can see, there's this dark and mysterious character you can see there in that cover. And things do get pretty spooky in book 2. So yeah, again, feedback was very similar, which is, you know, the intimate knowledge of the university. It really actually is something that I was able to get into with book 2. And of course, you know, some of the people who've been to Cambridge, they make the same thing, which is some of the elements of what it's like to be at Cambridge don't really change, but actually other elements do change. And I use the fantasy to sort of draw out the sort of key differences. So there's the 2 books. They're the 2 I've published so far. And the next one will be hopefully coming out later this year. And I'm really keen, hopefully, to be able to release that before Christmas, so that if any of you are around at Christmas, you should be able to get a copy of that too. So if you like the stories, the main stories, then I definitely recommend buying the books. But if you're not sure whether it's your genre or not, you can have a look at my website. And I've got this website, and on the website, I've written some short stories, which is set in this like quasi-Gothic world of Cambridge Gothic. They're all set in Cambridge University, and they are ghost stories. So they're much shorter. They've got a sort of like a supernatural theme to them. I've got 5 of them there, and you can basically subscribe to the website, and I just send them to you free. And every now and again, I'll do a new short story, and any subscriber to the website will get a free short story. But those 5 stories are available for you on my website. So just subscribe and I'll send them to you. And that means that you can have a look at those and see if that sort of like style of writing and that sort of storyline sort of works for you. They're all set in Cambridge or have a Cambridge connection. So Come Out to Play involves David's Bookshop. Some of you might know David's Bookshop. A Late Arrival involves an admissions interview at Cambridge, a student being interviewed. A Poison Chalice involves a member of the catering staff at Cambridge. The Funeral March is a concert performed in the old Divinity School, and also a little bit of stuff in the chapel at St John's. And Bloodied Blades involves a story down at the boathouse. So again, they're all free, and you can have a look at those and download those and read those and see if they work for you. And that's the website, www.marknwells.com. I'm sure Jane can circulate it afterwards, and then you can go and have a look at that yourself. It's on the website. I've got a number of other things on there as well. I've got on the website, I've got links to get the books, but also I've got links to my social media, so you can actually go and have a look at the things like my BookBub page, which is a really great site if you like reading, because BookBub is a really good site for that, because you can actually, on BookBub, you can get really good deals on books you're interested in. So if ever I'm doing a deal on one of my books, then obviously you can go and hopefully get that at a special price. And if you are, if you're interested in things like Instagram, then I go around Cambridge and I take photographs of places I'm going to be setting scenes in. I also take photographs and do little short stories and things that I put up on Facebook. So there's a whole bunch of links there. If you're interested in the world of Cambridge Gothic, you can find them on my website. One of the things that I said I'd do with Jane is I'd answer questions at the end. And if you're interested in that, then anything about the series, do let me know. I know a number of people have been asking me, where can you get the books from? Normally you can get them at Heifers, and unfortunately Heifers is shut at the moment, so they're available on Amazon. You can get a Kindle version, a print version, and an audiobook on Amazon. The second audiobook's not quite out yet, so I'm just working on that at the moment with my production company, and that should be out in a few weeks' time. But certainly book one's available on audio already, so you can get them there. And if you want a signed version, then just contact Karina, and then I'll sign it for you, and then Karina will make sure you get a copy of it.